Perched on the border of the two Virginias lies the city of Bluefield. At an elevation of 2,600 feet, this is the highest elevated American city east of Denver. More than half the city's population has left since the decline of the coal mining industry began in earnest in the 1980s. But many years ago, Bluefield was a place of importance as a major division point on the Norfolk and Western Railway. Coal was king in southern West Virginia, and the wealth from this once lucrative industry was demonstrated in many dozens of cities and towns like Bluefield. Sacred Heart Catholic Church has stood almost unchanged for 100 years in what was once a thriving nucleus of West Virginia's coal mining region. The archives of this historic treasure offer a unique perspective of Bluefield's past. From an enterprising priest, to a mysterious artist, to an order of hard-working nuns, Sacred Heart Parish has endured as an intimate part of Bluefield's past, tracing back to the city's very beginning. The first pioneers to live in what would eventually become Bluefield were the Davidson and Bailey families, who settled here in the 1770s. Having received a generous land grant from King George III, they built a fortified settlement where the native Shawnee people had lived for time immemorial. People in early America were aware of coal deposits in this part of the Appalachian Mountains, some of the most plentiful in North America, in fact. But up until then, coal had little use. All that began to change in the 1870s. The Industrial Revolution was an age of unprecedented growth and technological innovation. The factories, electric plants, ships, and locomotives that drove change and generated unfathomable wealth were powered almost universally by steam. Derived from boiling water, the most economical fuel for the fires that created steam was coal. And the bituminous, high-sulfur content coal buried deep in the mountains of West Virginia was of exceptional quality. Investors began turning their attention to this sparsely developed corner of the country, funding railroads tunneling their way through the mountains on a quest to reach the immeasurable coal deposits of the Allegheny Plateau. In the early 1880s, the Norfolk and Western Railway began battling its way through the wilderness with trestles and tunnels to reach the Pocahontas coal seam. Norfolk and Western established a flag station at the highest point on the newly minted New River extension near the old Higginbotham homestead, calling the station and the small community that began to emerge around it Higginbotham Summit. The opening of the flat-top tunnel through Elkhorn Mountain a few years later in 1888 was the real logistical achievement that paved the way for large-scale coal mining. The tunnel allowed access to the vast, winding hollows of the Pocahontas coal field. Traffic on the New River extension more than quadrupled that year, as people, equipment, and assets began flooding into southern West Virginia to support the burgeoning coal mining industry. As the story goes, the name Bluefield came from Elizabeth Davidson. She noticed the blooming blue mountain chicory and remarked to the postmistress, Hattie Hannah, how blue they made the fields. Hannah submitted the name Bluefields to the U.S. Post Office, and in 1889 the city was incorporated as Bluefield, without the S. Around that same time, the old Higginbotham farmhouse was cleared to make way for the young city's first substantial structure, the three-story, Dutch-gabled Bluefield Inn. This very spot is where Bluefield's Catholic heritage began. Enticed by economic opportunities associated with the railroad, the small but growing town attracted people from all walks of life, particularly European immigrants from predominantly Catholic regions in Central and Eastern Europe. The first Mass in Bluefield was said to a handful of Catholics by Father John McBride at the Bluefield Inn in 1889. So sparsely populated was this part of the Virginias that Father McBride had to ride horseback some 50 miles over the mountains from Whitville, Virginia, where a Catholic parish had been functional since 1845. St. Mary's was called the Cathedral in the Wilderness, as it was the only Catholic church for some 300 miles between Lynchburg, Virginia, and Knoxville, Tennessee.
The railroad was the vein that pumped the blood into the other businesses, that pumped the blood into the town itself, gave people life, gave them a direction, gave them a purpose, gave them a business, gave them employment.
But as the developments of the railroad and the coal mines had begun to shift the demographics of Appalachia, so too was its religious landscape beginning to shift. In 1894, Bishop Donahue decided that Bluefield's growing Catholic population warranted the creation of a new parish. About a dozen Catholic families, who by then were attending Mass in an old laundry that once stood on Raleigh Street, began planning for the construction of a church. They were led by the newly transferred priest from Abingdon, the French Reverend Émile Olivier, who had left his wealthy and powerful family in Normandy to pursue a life in the priesthood. Together, Father Olivier and the congregation raised $700, about $27,000 in today's value, and selected a lot on North Mercer Street, where by 1896 builders had completed a new church and rectory. The new church was named Sacred Heart, a centuries-old allusion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, which represents Christ's divine love, compassion, and sacrifice for humanity. Lit by electric light high on a hill in the heart of Bluefield, Sacred Heart was a symbol of faith as much as progress for both Bluefield itself and its burgeoning Catholic community. But Father Olivier was not satisfied with stopping at the new church in Bluefield. He ventured deep into the winding hollows to serve the spiritual and social needs of other growing immigrant communities, continuing to influence the establishment of Catholic parishes in mining towns throughout southern West Virginia. As immigration increased exponentially during the opening decades of the 20th century, places like Bluefield continued to attract people from nearly every walk of life who were in search of opportunities for economic advancement. The coal mines and the railroad afforded those opportunities. European immigrants, African Americans from the Deep South, and the descendants of homesteaders converged in places like Bluefield. The Battolino family were one of tens of thousands of families who came to the coalfields of the Appalachian Mountains in search of a better quality of life.
Mom and Dad were born in Italy. They met in Bluefield, and they came because of the railroad. I used to say, Ma, what happened to New York? What do you mean Bluefield? Because of the railroad. That's where the jobs were. It was the core. Well, you can see our downtown Bluefield is filled with railroad tracks. The black gold coal coming from the mountains, it was essential. That was our industry, and Bluefield was thriving, just thriving. The downtown was hustle, bustle, busy. Stores were open, business were flourishing. People had money. People from the coal fields would come to Bluefield to shop on the weekends because Bluefield was the place.
Although social pressure, as much as the law itself, encouraged immigrants to assimilate to Anglo-American culture, religious expression and shared cultural values fostered community, acting as a vehicle that helped preserve vital traditions.
My life consisted of Italians, and more Italians. Where I lived, 2 streets down, was considered Little Italy. On Sunday morning, we would go to Mass. We would come home, we would have pasta. The men would roll up their sleeves, undo their ties, get their cigars, get their bottle of homemade wine, and sit at the table and play an Italian card game called Scolba. And the women with the children would walk down the street and go visiting to all of the Italians. And that was just a way of life. That's what we did. It was wonderful to feel that we had such community around us. And we all felt like family. It was Little Italy. My mom would fix a lasagna or pasta and meatballs and homemade bread because that's what she did. We feed people. You have to eat. Una mamma italiana e una benedizione di Dio. An Italian mother is a gift from God. It's there, but it's just fallen apart, and it's just kind of fallen by the wayside, and it's sad.
By the early 1920s, Bluefield's population had grown tenfold in just 20 years to some 20,000 people. A thriving commercial sector with shops, offices, restaurants, and hotels had developed near the railroad station on Princeton Avenue. One commentator remarked that Bluefield had become a little bit Chicago, a little bit New York, and a whole lot of Pittsburgh.
A lot of the Italian immigrants came in and worked at the mines and the railroad here in Bluefield. Downtown Bluefield had most of the shops, more like an outdoor mall. The surrounding area of downtown Bluefield had that supported the mining industry, motor repair shops, and Bluefield Hardware, Bluefield Supply. They also supported the mining industry, and probably those places employed somewhere between 50 and 100 employees. So we had 300 or 400 blue-collar workers in downtown Bluefield at that time.
In the midst of this rapid growth, the city's Catholic population had also swelled, rendering their small church on North Mercer Street no longer fit for purpose. Planning and fundraising began for a larger church that was better suited to meet the needs of the growing parish. A lot was selected on the corner of Monroe and Wyoming Streets, just 1 block away from the bustling Princeton Avenue. The diocese engaged the services of Pittsburgh architect Edward M. Weber, a revered master of ecclesiastical architecture. Fresh from designing the Cathedral of St. Joseph in Wheeling, along with Immaculate Conception Church at Clarksburg, St. John's at Wellsburg, St. Margaret Mary's in Parkersburg, and several others, Weber was the natural choice. He drafted plans for a magnificent building in the Spanish Gothic style, which Weber later featured in his publication, Catholic Ecclesiology. The diocese approved Weber's plans, and the cornerstone was laid in 1924, along with a blessing from the bishop. Built from native sandstone and limestone, the church's construction employed craftsmen and artisans from across the American Northeast. By the summer of 1925, one of southern West Virginia's most refined architectural statements was finally complete. Rich in medieval symbolism, the church's interior was no less impressive than its exterior. Soaring Romanesque arches in the nave are supported by massive composite columns imported from Italy. The clerestory windows above the arches are emblazoned with the fleur-de-lis, a symbol in Catholic tradition that represents the purity of the Virgin Mary, and more broadly, a symbol of the divine right of kings. In the coffers of the wooden ceiling are spears, nails, and various other symbols, representing the crucifixion of Christ. Commissioned to Pennsylvania glazier George W. Sauter, the mesmerizing aisle windows depict saints whose nationalities largely reflected the diverse, ethnic population of Bluefield in the early 20th century. Among them are Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, the patron saint of charity, Saint Louis, the patron saint of architecture, Saint Cecilia, the patron saint of church music, and Saint Patrick, the patron saint of engineers, who legend asserts drove all the snakes from Ireland. In the gallery above the screened narthex is the church's original organ, manufactured by Teller's Kent Organ Company of Erie, Pennsylvania. Although Teller's Kent rebuilt the instrument in 1971 to expand its capabilities, this is nevertheless the same functional organ that has been here since 1928. At the eastern end of the nave hangs the great crucifix. Surrounding Christ on the cross are the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, whose Gospels in the New Testament tell varied accounts of the life and passion of Jesus. On either side of the principal altar are the side altars with their dramatic panels and friezes. On the right is the altar to Joseph. Although Christ's earthly father lacks a major speaking role in the Gospels, he is nevertheless foundational to church doctrine as the guardian and protector of the Holy Family. On the left is the altar to Mary. As the Mother of God incarnate, she is represented by a painting of the Madonna and Child, her immeasurable significance to Christendom modeled through her faith and obedience. At the beating heart of the church is the sanctuary. Beneath an Umbrian blue background set with gold stars representing the presence of divinity stands the principal altar. Surrounded by the same style of Gothic elements as the side altars, its 5 panels depict Christ with 4 attendant angels, holding banners displaying biblical versing from Psalm 26. The center panel shows Christ and the parish's namesake, the Sacred Heart. In addition to their sacred religious meaning, the church's paintings are also historically significant in their own right. The church's architect, Edward M. Weber, commissioned the supremely gifted artist, Lee F. McQuaid, to produce paintings for the altars and the crucifix. A young native of Pittsburgh, McQuaid had spent time in New York as a decorator and designer, and was entirely self-trained as a painter. His style was unusual for the time, drawing inspiration from both medieval Italian painting and the more recent Art Nouveau movement. Like being inside a dream, this fantastical style at the confluence of tradition and innovation fit the tone of the new church. McQuaid's panels were considered such masterpieces that they were initially displayed at the prestigious Gillespie Gallery in Pittsburgh before being crated and shipped to Bluefield for installation in the church. After his commission at Sacred Heart, Lee F. McQuaid would live on to become a respected and award-winning American artist. Since his death in the 1970s, the painter's legacy has become a distant memory, the historical record largely bereft of the details of his career. Other works by McQuaid surely survive in many other obscure places throughout North America. But more than a century later, the panels in Sacred Heart still hold pride of place as one of the young artist's earliest masterpieces. Completed at a cost of $90,000, some $1.6 million in today's value, the new church was dedicated with fanfare on September 6, 1925. The parish was so prosperous in the 1920s that the congregation managed to pay down half the eye-watering construction cost in just 12 months. Despite his work in expanding the influence of the Roman Catholic Church in southern West Virginia, Father Olivier would never see the magnificent new church that stemmed directly from his work. He died from cancer in the autumn of 1920. During his 26-year-long pastorate in Bluefield, Father Olivier was instrumental in the construction of Catholic churches throughout the Pocahontas coalfield. A handful of those churches, including Sacred Heart in Powhatan, Our Lady of Victory in Gary, and St. Elizabeth of Hungary in Pocahontas, still survive today. The new Sacred Heart Church in Bluefield was dedicated to the enterprising French priest whose work tangibly improved the lives of countless parishioners, and who was deeply respected from people of various religious and ethnic persuasions. Almost 11 decades after his death, his portrait still hangs in the church's sacristy. The new modern Sacred Heart, with significantly more space than the previous church, was better prepared to serve the needs of its parishioners.
My whole life consisted of Catholic and Italian, and that was my life. We either were going to church or going to visit my grandparents, and that's what I did. And I remember Sacred Heart as being vital in my lifetime. It was crucial to go to Mass, but we didn't feel like it was a burden. We wanted to go because we were brought up that way.
I ran across the invoice for this building a while back when they were going through old files and shredding some. This church building cost $80,000 back in 1924. To replace it, especially with the stonework and all this concrete, it would be $3-4 million. It's a testament to the people. Even though $80,000 was a large sum of money in the 1920s, they were willing to invest in something that was going to stand the test of time. So here's the proof: 100 years. My generation, the baby boomers, don't have a hard time with a building of this type. But my grandchildren are early 20s, and you hear comments from them as, why do you have this statue of Blessed Mother? Why do you have the St. Joseph? Why do you have this? Why do you have those big columns and all that sort of stuff? But I think you can be more reverent coming into this building than to a newer church that's just particle board and a little doodad of paint. I think the people that come into the church, they whisper because they want to be reverent.
Perpetuating tradition may be rewarding, but historic preservation comes at a steep cost, both financially and emotionally.
We painted the church probably 5 times since I've been here. We put in new pews, new flooring, new altars, new wiring, new electronics, the Facebook live streaming, new sound system. We put new storm windows on the building. We've pressure washed the building twice since I've been here. We put a new roof on twice since I've been here. Probably 10 years ago, somebody broke in the weekend of Thanksgiving, broke into this building, tore out all the plumbing. It was all copper pipe. And then they started tearing out all the 4-out wire and everything, and because they were, selling the copper. And they did $8,000 in damage. We came in Monday morning and this place was flooded. Yes, it was more expensive and more time consuming because you don't have steel. There's very little steel in this building. It's all wood and concrete. And the wood is 100 years old. The people in this area are very generous and very religious. There's still the love for old buildings.
Before the new church itself was even dedicated, the parish had also begun to seriously consider the establishment of a parochial school in Bluefield. Historically, education had long been a priority for the Roman Catholic Church. Its vast array of seminaries, parochial schools, and academies provided access to educational and vocational development for segments of society that often encountered hurdles in their search for advancement. West Virginia's first Catholic school, Mount de Chantal Visitation Academy, was established in Wheeling in 1848. Between 1850 and 1923, Catholic schools in other cities, including Huntington and Charleston, had also been established. The closest Catholic school to Bluefield was Villa Maria Academy in Wytheville, Virginia, run by the Sisters of the Visitation. A distinguished boarding school that also admitted day students, Villa Maria was some 50 miles away in the heart of the New River Valley, where Father McBride once trudged on horseback from to say Mass to Bluefield's earliest Catholics, a place that was hardly accessible to working-class families in the coal fields. Despite the disproportionately large percentage of Roman Catholics living in southern West Virginia by the early 20th century, a parochial school had yet to be established in this part of the state. The bishop asked the Sisters of the Poor Child Jesus in Parkersburg if they would be interested in operating a parochial school in Bluefield. An order devoted to the care and education of children, they accepted the bishop's offer and began to make plans. Construction of the school began, and by the summer of 1926, builders completed a small school building adjacent to the church, with 4 classrooms and a lunchroom. On August 22nd, the Bluefield Daily Telegraph announced that the nuns had finally arrived. The parish purchased a house next door to the church and converted it into a convent, where the nuns made their new home. Sacred Heart School began its first session in the autumn of 1926, with 43 students. The school excelled, its enrollment eventually swelling to several times that number. Though the school and its teachers nevertheless sparked intrigue in this part of the United States, where Protestantism reigned supreme.
Absolutely respected, almost kind of not feared, but a great deal of wonder. They wondered about, oh, that's those Catholic schools. One time in particular, all 150 students walked from the school down to the Granada Theater to see the 10 Commandments. So here we are with the Sisters of the Poor Child Jesus in their habits, when of course community would refer to them as penguins, because that's just what they did. But they saw us walking, and it was cars stopped. Cars pulled over to watch us walk down to the theater because they were actually in awe of the whole thing.
Despite public intrigue, the nuns took seriously their vocation of preparing children for the world. The school allowed enrollment from any family in the community, regardless of their religious faith.
There was a few non-Catholic students that came to the school, and it was very well accepted by the community. 2 grades in each room, first and second was together, all the way up to 7 and 8. And I think the 9th graders had their own room downstairs. And of course we had nuns, had a couple lay teachers, Opal O'Connor and Miss Fleming. They were like the 3rd and 4th grade and the 5th and 6th grade teachers. And the nun would come in, and the boys would get up and bow, and the girls would genuflect, and they were very strict and disciplined with a ruler if necessary.
We were very fortunate to have Sacred Heart School because not every small community has a Catholic school. The nuns were the Sisters of the Poor Child Jesus. It sounds like a severe name because it is. They were strict. And thank God for that, because I had an excellent education. There were 150 students in 9 grades. So we really had individual attention. I had 9 years of Latin, and it's when I first started, the Mass was still in Latin. And so whenever there was, for example, a funeral Mass, the school kids would come down to the church and would sing the Latin Mass. I loved having 9 years of Latin. It helped me tremendously when I went to Bluefield High School. No one knew me. They referred to me as that Catholic Italian. They didn't know me. So I got involved with theater. And my first role was Shakespeare's Ophelia, one of the crazies. And my first line of coming out on the stage at Bluefield High School was, "Where am I? Where am I? Canst anyone tell me?" Well, then the school referred to me as, "That's that crazy Italian Catholic." They devoted their lives to the children, to the education, to helping them find a place in the world, and they could spot if someone was troubled, and they would take them under their wing, and that they could give advice and have such empathy with us to tell us things that we needed to know. Whenever Reverend Mother came in the room, you stopped what you were doing, you put your pencil pen down, and you stood up. "Good morning, Reverend Mother." That was it, out of respect. And then started the teaching of the day. Perhaps it would be English. That particular nun, Sister Mary Esther, would teach English. Then at the end of that period, the nun would switch out, and another one, Sister Mary Clare, Sister Mary Gabriel, Sister Anna Veronica. All the nuns would go in and teach their particular class and then move on to the next one. Priscilla got hit in the eye with one of these spitballs, and our punishment, the whole school, 150 students, the girls had to do math problems till about 8 o'clock that night, and the boys had to run around the gym till about 8 o'clock. That was the punishment. So they didn't do that again. I was at Sacred Heart School for grades 1 through 9. I was the last valedictorian for Sacred Heart School because after I graduated 9th grade, they only went to the 8th grade after that. So then soon after, the nuns left. So we didn't have a Catholic school anymore.
Education is important, and I think that's one thing that has hurt the Catholic Church is the number of parochial schools. Because I went to parochial school to 8th grade. When I got to 9th grade, I knew my metric system. I knew a language. My math was a year ahead of everybody else. My 9th grade was like a review of my first 8th grade. And Catholic parochial school, the education is much better. And I wish my grandchildren could have gone to parochial school.
The school was designed by its original builders with the possibility of eventual expansion in mind, and by the 1950s the school had indeed become so popular and well-funded that an expansion had become necessary. A third floor with a gymnasium was added, and the convent was moved into a warren of rooms below. However, by the early 1960s, there were no longer enough new vocations of sisters to keep Sacred Heart School operational. Despite an extraordinary effort to keep the school open, Sacred Heart closed its doors at the end of the 1961 session. The remaining sisters left their convent and returned to their mother house in Parkersburg, where their dwindling numbers continued to serve the diocese to the best of their ability. By 2016, Sister Mary Thomasina was the last of their community. Her death was a quiet bookend to the Order's 93 years of service to the diocese. The Sisters of the Poor Child Jesus are no longer active in West Virginia. The 1950s and 60s were the zenith of West Virginia's coal mining industry, and correspondingly they were also Bluefield's apogee as a place of importance. Like the blood vessels of an enormous creature, the railroad made Bluefield thrive. As a major division point for Norfolk and Western, the railroad spur lines carried coal from mines and preparation plants in Appalachia's remotest creases. Some 60 million tons of coal moved through Bluefield every year, accounting for nearly 1/10 of the nation's entire annual coal production. In addition to serpentine trains of coal hoppers, several passenger trains were also calling in Bluefield every day, providing a vital means of transportation in West Virginia before the age of the automobile. Slow-moving branch line trains connected Bluefield to small towns throughout the Pocahontas coal field, but express services connecting Bluefield to cities far beyond the mountains laid claim to fame. They were immortalized through prestigious names like the Cavalier and the Powhatan Arrow. A collection of these locomotives and rolling stock are on display today at the Virginia Museum of Transportation in Roanoke. Workhorses like the J-Class and Class A were some of the most powerful steam engines ever built. Along with rolling stock including coal cars and passenger cars, some of which once belonged to America's most prestigious rail services, these remnants of a bygone age embody the achievements of generations of hard work.
And the vital railway, the Gulf Coast streamliner, the Powhatan Arrow.
They communicated people, goods, culture, and progress throughout southern West Virginia, creating the economic and social forces that built Sacred Heart. As coal mining and the railroad began to sharply decline in the 1980s, their exeunt began to change Bluefield. A perfect storm of factors including mechanization, competition from coal in the West and other energy sources, and increased legislation regulating pollution would ultimately claim nearly 90% of jobs in West Virginia's coal mining industry. With less and less coal coming out of the mines to the west, rail traffic in Bluefield also began to steeply decline. The prosperity of the railroad, after all, directly correlated to the prosperity of the coal mines. As jobs in both of these once powerful sectors slowly evaporated, people were left with little choice but to leave in search of work elsewhere.
Because there's no industry here, that means there's no chance for advancement or for a good job. So kids usually move, and when they move, they take a lot with them.
You don't have the population. Labor is a problem. We've lost a lot. Young people moved out of state. We depend a lot on our senior citizens here.
More than half of Bluefield's population has left, and for many of those that remain, economic hardship is a daily battle. For religious organizations like Sacred Heart, shrinking resources make the mission of helping those in need increasingly difficult. In the former convent below the old Sacred Heart School, volunteers operate a clothing mission and food pantry, to which some local restaurants donate their unsold food. Demand for this vital lifeline has become 4 times higher than it was a decade ago. The food pantry opens once a week, under the allegorical gaze of Saint Elizabeth of Hungary from across the parking lot. As the legend insists, Princess Elizabeth was caught secretly delivering bread to those in need. When discovered and asked to reveal what she was carrying, Elizabeth opened her cloak and revealed that the bread she was carrying had miraculously turned to roses to evade detection. In 2024, Sacred Heart Parish celebrated the centennial of its church building on Wyoming Street. Although Bluefield had changed immeasurably in the 100 years since the church was built, the parish was still hanging on.
And more than 100 years ago, immigrants moving into Bluefield, West Virginia started the first Roman Catholic church in Bluefield, West Virginia. However, growing the population of the city meant they soon needed to grow the building as well. Spearheaded by the church's priest at the time, Father Olive, they built the Sacred Heart Catholic Church.
Well, this area was built by immigrants, a lot of Irish, Italian, Hungarian, and they were Catholic. And it grew so quickly, they outgrew the smaller church.
To celebrate this big milestone, they opened their doors to the community, inviting them for tours today.
We have to celebrate the beauty of this building. It's just an amazing building. The masses are gorgeous. Tomorrow's mass is going to be amazing. The bishop is coming, big celebrations and dinner afterwards. So we had to celebrate 100 years of the most beautiful building in Bluefield.
In observance of the centennial, Sacred Heart's bells were cleaned and restored to working order, once again sounding at noon each day, having hung in silence for nearly a quarter of a century.
It was very community oriented. We all felt safe. We all felt like we were together. You felt safe. It was that sense of community, of belonging. We felt like we belonged together. And that feeling is somewhat lacking today. Things are different now. It was a whole different time, but such a warm, fuzzy feeling. I feel like I'm totally blessed by having that opportunity.
It really hasn't changed that much, and I'm kind of glad to see it the way it was. New pews and carpet and things like that, but other than that, it's still the same church as back in the 50s and 60s. As you sit there waiting for Mass to start, you just look around and bring back memories. This is our home.
Sacred Heart Parish has been an intimate part of Bluefield's colorful history from the city's very beginning, more than 130 years ago. A house of worship holds special significance in its own right, as a place of man's right to religious expression. But places like Sacred Heart are also something more ambiguous. More than mere bricks and mortar, places like this are a direct connection to our past, a living testament to the confluence of generations, and a reminder that, despite the chasm of time, we still share the same space with people from many lifetimes ago.